The stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the tides of war sweeping across the cosmos. The Imperium Zenith, an empire as ancient as the dust of forgotten worlds, stretched across the void, consuming system after system in its relentless march. Countless civilizations had stood against them. None remained. Now their gaze had turned to Earth. The message arrived in every known human language, its meaning unmistakable. Surrender or be eradicated. It was not a negotiation. It was not a warning. It was a death sentence. For centuries, humanity had clawed its way into the galactic stage, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as survivors. They had no vast fleets, no planet-cracking weapons, no ancient god-kings commanding the obedience of 1,000 worlds. They had only their will to fight. The Imperium expected them to kneel. They did not know Earth. Commander Elias Cade stood at the edge of the Erebus Station's war room, staring at the holographic display of the Imperium's approaching armada. It was a sight that could break lesser men, a wall of dreadnoughts, each a floating apocalypse, advancing toward the Sol system. Like the judgment of an uncaring god, Cade had fought many battles before. This was different. There would be no retreat, no fallback positions, no negotiations. Earth was a backwater in the grand cosmic theater. There were no allies to call upon. The only thing standing between the Imperium and total planetary subjugation was the Aegis Coalition, humanity's last fleet, a mismatched collection of battle-worn destroyers, aging carriers, and retrofitted civilian ships. His fingers clenched into a fist. He had seen the Imperium's handiwork before, the smoldering husks of entire species who had chosen to resist. And yet, despite the hopelessness, something inside him refused to bend. A voice from the tactical console interrupted his thoughts. "Commander, the Imperium's flagship has entered the system." Cade exhaled slowly. "It begins." The Eternal Dominion was not a warship. It was an extinction event given form. It loomed beyond Jupiter's orbit, a monstrous moon-sized behemoth, its hull stitched with biomechanical horrors, its surface shifting with living metal tendrils that pulsed as if breathing. Its presence warped space-time, a gravity well unto itself. And then a voice transmitted across all human frequencies, deep, cold, absolute. "Humanity, you stand at the precipice of annihilation. Bow before the inevitable, kneel, or perish." Supreme. Archon Zalzir did not shout. He did not need to. His words carried the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds. Inside the war room, the silence was thick enough to suffocate. Cade's jaw tightened. His eyes burned as he watched the monstrosity beyond the stars. They were outmatched, but he would be damned before he bowed. The war room was a battlefield of its own. Earth's leaders, generals, and scientists argued, their voices colliding like weapons. Some saw reason in surrender, better servitude than extinction. Others spat at the very thought, better to die standing than live as slaves. Mia Carter, leader of the planetary resistance, slammed her fist against the table. "You think surrender will save us? You think they'll let us live?" Her eyes burned with fire. Every species that bowed to them was wiped out once they outlived their usefulness. They don't enslave, they erase. Dr. Anya Patel, head of Earth's Advanced Defense Initiative, spoke next. Her voice was quieter, but no less damning. "Their technology surpasses ours by centuries. They've destroyed civilizations that were more advanced than we ever dreamed to be. If we fight, we may not win." All eyes turned to Cade. He looked at the men and women before him, the last hope of humanity. His voice was iron. "Then we make them bleed for every inch." The room fell. Silent, Mia exhaled, then nodded. No surrender. One by one, hands rose in agreement. Earth had made its choice. The decision echoed across the void. Humanity's final response was transmitted to every colony, every outpost, every surviving member of their species. "We do not kneel." The signal rippled outward, intercepted by countless alien civilizations, some who had once fought, some who had once lived in fear of the Imperium. For the first time in thousands of years, someone had said no. The Imperium responded with fire. It began with a whisper of light. Then the sky ignited. From the eternal dominion, spears of antimatter rained down like the vengeance of dying gods, obliterating entire cities in seconds. New Avalon, Earth's capital, was the first to fall. Billions turned to ashes before they could even scream. From orbit, Cade stood stone-faced, watching as entire continents burned. The oceans boiled, the skyline shattered. His grip tightened on the console, his voice low. It's begun. Aboard Erebus Station, alarms blared. The remaining human fleet mobilized, a final stand against the storm. Destroyers, carriers, even retrofitted civilian freighters, every last vessel capable of flight took to the void. Cade's voice echoed across the fleet's comms. We fight, not for victory, but for defiance. For every city they burn, we burn 10 of their warships. For every life they take, we make them pay 1,000-fold. He stood before his crew, his next words etched into history. We make them bleed. We make them fear us. The fleet surged forward, their engines burning like the rage of a defiant species. The war for Earth had begun. The void cracked open as the Crimson Legion arrived. It did not arrive in silence. It arrived with the weight of 1,000 fallen worlds, heralded by a storm of hyperspace ruptures and the deep, resonant hum of a war machine that had consumed empires. The Imperium Zenith did not send scouts. They did not probe defenses or negotiate. They came as they always did, like an executioner swinging the blade. Millions of warships, some the size of continents, others writhing like living organisms, descended upon the Sol system. City ship. Annihilators, orbital striders, sentient dreadnoughts, the apex predators of war. Inside the war room of Erebus Station, the Aegis Coalition's commanders stood frozen. The holographic battle display flooded with red markers, each representing an incoming enemy fleet. There were too many, a junior officer whispered almost to himself. God help us. Commander Elias Cade's expression did not change. His hands clenched behind his back, his voice steady as the weight of command settled upon him like a curse. Scramble the fleet. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. Earth's last warriors launched into the void. They were outnumbered, 100 to 1. It didn't matter. They had no intention of surviving, only of making the enemy suffer. The first wave clashed in the upper atmosphere of Jupiter, where its crimson storms swirled like a planetary wound. The Aegis Coalition struck first. Missiles lanced forward, nuclear warheads igniting in a chain of thermonuclear blossoms. Railguns howled, sending hyper-accelerated slugs that ripped through the void, finding weak spots in the Imperium's fleet. For a moment, it seemed as if the human fleet held the line. Then the Imperium's superweapons activated. A beam of pure antimatter carved through the first row of human destroyers. Aegis-class battleships melted like ice in fire. A gravitic lance tore into the UTS Valor, folding its hull inward before detonating in a silent, sickening explosion. Aegis pilots screamed as biomechanical harbingers, organic horrors latched onto their ships, tearing into metal like a predator feasting on flesh. The human fleet burned in the cold of space. And yet, they did not stop. Squadron of Earth's last fighter pilots weaved between the Imperium's behemoths, dropping EMP disruptors and setting off nuclear pulse bombs inside enemy formations. A dozen warships were lost in seconds. 100 Imperium ships followed them, into death. It wasn't enough. Cade clenched his jaw, watching his fleet die in real time. They needed a miracle. They were not getting one. Inside the war room, Earth's diplomats sent their final distress calls. The Taral Republic, the Vixari Freeholds, the Ordos Accord. Once they had called themselves Earth's allies. They had stood beside humans in trade, exchanged cultural wisdom, and spoken of a shared future in the stars. Now they watched from the safety of their own sectors, their transmissions cold. We cannot risk war with the Imperium. You brought this upon yourselves. Humanity is alone in this fight. Cade turned away from the transmission as the diplomatic team sat in horrified silence. There were no allies coming, only enemies at their doorstep. His voice was ice. Cut communications. We waste no more time on cowards. He turned to the battle map. There was still a war to win. The skies above Earth rained fire. The Imperium's planetary bombardment began in earnest. Orbital defense satellites were ripped apart by gravitational torpedoes. Kinetic rods, each the size of a skyscraper, fell from orbit, striking with the force of nuclear explosions. London ceased to exist. Tokyo became glass. The shields above New Avalon, Earth's last capital, collapsed under sustained bombardment. From the ruins of the sky, the Imperium's ground forces descended. They were not soldiers. They were not even conventional machines of war. They were war-born nightmares. Genetic horrors, engineered in vats, birthed only to kill, poured into Earth's cities. Flesh-fused biotitans, serpentine warforms, mechanical reapers whose blades sliced through entire squads in an instant. There was no hesitation. They slaughtered everything in their path. On Erebus Station, Cade stared at the chaos unfolding on the main display. His world was burning. For the first time in his life, he felt helpless. They were losing. There was only one card left to play. Cade turned to his remaining officers. We can't win this fight. His voice was steel, unshaken by the horror outside. But we can make them regret starting it. Operation Last Dawn, a suicide mission. Aegis's remaining warships would lure the Imperium's fleet into Jupiter's gravity. Well, the sheer tidal forces would create unpredictable havoc in the Imperium's formations. If humanity was going to die, they were taking as many of those bastards with them as possible. In the ruins of New Avalon, Mia Carter's resistance fighters dug in. Armed with scavenged weapons, they turned skyscrapers into bunkers, fought in the alleyways, and rigged entire city blocks with explosives. On Mars, Earth's second stronghold, the battle was just beginning. Cade stared at the tactical screen. The war was already lost, but he would be damned if they made it easy. His last transmission to the fleet was short. Fight until you have nothing left. Then keep fighting. The bridge of Erebus Station shook under impact. The war for Earth would be decided in fire, and humanity would not go quietly. Jupiter loomed in the darkness, its swirling storms a behemoth of chaos and destruction. It was the perfect killing ground if only the trap had worked. The plan was simple: lure the Imperium's vanguard into the planet's deep gravity well and watch them get torn apart by unpredictable spatial distortions. For a moment it seemed to work. The Imperium's Crimson Legion pursued the retreating Aegis fleet, moving deep into the volatile zone. Earth's last warships looked like easy prey. But then they stopped. On the bridge of Erebus Station, Cade's pulse pounded as the Imperium halted their advance far too soon. "Sir, they're not following. They're holding position outside the event horizon." The Imperium had anticipated the maneuver. A single order echoed across enemy comms. Deploy gravitic torpedoes. Reality itself ripped apart. From a hidden flank, the Imperium launched singularity warheads, weapons that created temporary black holes. One by one, Earth's warships collapsed into nothingness. Entire formations of destroyers imploded, caught in their own gravitational fields. Cade clenched his jaw as reports poured in. The trap had become a slaughterhouse. Their greatest chance to cripple the Imperium? Gone. Their fleet? A graveyard. His voice did not waver. No retreat, no surrender, make them bleed. The Aegis fleet charged one last time against all odds. If Earth was doomed, they would make the Imperium pay for every breath they took. Dr. Anya Patel had spent her entire life mastering the laws of physics, and now she was about to break them. Beneath the frozen wastelands of Antarctica, buried under 2 miles of reinforced titanium, Facility Theta trembled as distant orbital strikes pounded the surface above. The entire underground complex was built to withstand nuclear hellfire, but even here, the war crept closer. None of that mattered. Not when Patel stood before the machine that should never have been built. A glowing core pulsed before her, a shimmering sphere of raw, untamed energy, shifting between colors that shouldn't exist. The quantum destabilizer. A device built in secret. A weapon designed not to kill, but to erase. If fired, it wouldn't merely destroy the Imperium's warships, it would unmake them. The laws of time, space, and causality would collapse around, anything caught in its wake, folding reality into a void from which nothing could return. The Imperium wouldn't retreat if they saw it activate. They wouldn't surrender. They simply would not be anymore. Juno Vale, Patel's lead engineer, wiped the sweat from his forehead as warning alarms blared across the control deck. "We're overloading," he warned, his voice tense. "Power grids, at 90% capacity, but the stabilizers aren't holding. If this thing misfires..." Patel slammed a fist onto the control panel. "We don't have a choice. If they waited, Earth would be glass within the hour." Juno hesitated, his hands hovering over the emergency release valves. "If we fire too soon, we could tear a hole in reality itself." Patel exhaled. Her mind ran through every calculation she had ever performed on this device, every simulation that had ended in catastrophic collapse. But there was no time for caution. There was no room for hesitation. She turned, locking eyes with Juno. "Then let's aim carefully." The countdown began. Roan Tavarik had once believed in the Imperium Zenith. He had worn their black warplate, fought in the Crimson Legion, and stood in the halls of the Eternal Dominion, listening to Supreme Archon Salzir's commands like a priest receiving divine scripture. He had believed the Imperium was absolute, unbreakable. Now he stood before Commander Cade in the Erebus Station war room, preparing to shatter that illusion forever. Roan's voice was steady. "The Imperium's greatest strength isn't its weapons." Cade frowned. "Then what is it?" Roan stepped forward, tapping a console that displayed the massive enemy formation in orbit, where tens of thousands of Imperium warships blockaded Earth. "It's their control." Cade's expression hardened. "Explain." Roan pointed at the Eternal Dominion, the Imperium's flagship, a moon-sized monstrosity of black metal, biomechanical tendrils, and pulsing reactor cores. "The Imperium doesn't operate like human militaries," Roan said. "There is no autonomy, no decentralized command. Every ship, every soldier, every drone, it's all connected. A single network. Salzir doesn't just lead them, he controls them." Cade's eyes narrowed. Roan continued, voice low and deadly. "You take out a human general, the war continues. You take out an Imperium Archon, the war doesn't stop. Because another takes their place, but if you kill Salzir, you don't just kill a leader, you kill the entire machine." The war room fell into silence. Cade's eyes drifted to the tactical holomap, where thousands of red enemy markers flashed, overwhelming Earth's last defensive positions. Even if the quantum destabilizer worked, even if they held their ground, it wasn't enough. The Imperium had more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. They had nothing to lose, while Earth had everything. Finally, Cade exhaled and spoke the words that would define the war. "We board that ship." Roan nodded. "We kill Salzir." Mia Carter smirked, arms crossed. "And we burn their empire to the ground." There was no more debate. The mission had begun. New Avalon was dying. The once great capital of Earth had been reduced to ash and rubble, its towering skyscrapers now nothing more than burning skeletons, its streets choked with the wreckage of war. The Imperium's ground forces had descended like a plague, their biomechanical war beasts stalking through the ruins, hunting down the last survivors with uncaring efficiency. But if the Imperium thought humanity had been broken, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Mia Carter moved through the underground tunnels beneath the city, silent as a ghost. Her rifle clutched tight. Her resistance fighters crawled through the debris-choked catacombs, the last remnants of a force that refused to kneel. They were outgunned, outnumbered, doomed, but they were not done fighting. A whisper crackled over her comms. "Team 2 in position." Carter closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. She could hear them above, the thundering footsteps of an Imperium Walker battalion, massive mechanical war constructs, their biofused armor plating impervious to standard weaponry. They had cut through Earth's defenses like a knife through flesh. Until now. Carter exhaled. Detonate. The Earth roared. Half a mile away, the streets of New Avalon erupted in fire, entire city blocks collapsing into the abyss as the underground charges detonated in perfect synchronization. The Walker Battalion never saw it coming. One moment, they were marching forward, unstoppable. The next, they were falling, swallowed whole by an inferno of collapsing debris, metal and flame. The thunderous explosion sent shockwaves through the battlefield, shattering glass, toppling buildings, sending Imperium soldiers tumbling like broken dolls. A roar of triumph erupted from Carter's fighters. For the first time in history, the Imperium was losing forces on Earth, but the battle was far from over. She tapped her comms, her voice sharp. Status report. Walker column neutralized, came the response. Casualties minimal. We're moving to the next strike point. Good, but it wasn't enough. Carter turned to her squad. Keep moving. We hit them again before they regroup. Her fighters reloaded, adjusting their weapons, their faces grim and determined. They were not soldiers, they were engineers, factory workers, ex-police, scavengers, ordinary people forced into an extraordinary war, and they were winning. Not because they were stronger, not because they were smarter, but because they refused to die, because they refused to kneel. They would turn every building into a weapon, every street into a graveyard, and the Imperium would pay for every drop of human blood it had spilled. The Eternal Dominion hung in the darkness, a monolithic war god, its jagged hull bristling with planet-cracking weapons. It wasn't just a warship, it was the Imperium's beating heart, its mind, its will, and it was their target. Cade sat strapped into his seat aboard the drop shuttle, feeling the tremors of battle ripple through the hull. Outside, the shuttle's forward shields burned under relentless anti-air fire, Imperium auto turrets tracking their approach with deadly precision. 15 seconds to breach, the pilot yelled over comms. Inside the cramped cabin, his team made final weapon checks. Roan secured his plasma rifle, his face grim beneath the visor. Mia Carter tightened the straps on her armor, muttering a quiet curse. Beside her, 6 elite Marines, the last of Earth's Special Operations Division, stood ready. Carter glanced at Cade. This is a bad idea, Cade smirked. The worst. Roan's voice was calm, focused. We breach the AI core, we sever the Imperium's control network, and we take Zalzir down. Cade gave a sharp nod. No hesitation. We move fast, hit hard. This is our only shot. The shuttle shuddered violently as it crashed into the Eternal Dominion's outer hull, metal screaming against metal. Explosive charges detonated along the breach site, tearing open a wound in the ship's armor. The airlock doors blasted outward, revealing a corridor bathed in eerie crimson light. Cade's boots hit the deck first. Move. The team fanned out, weapons raised. Alarms screamed through the ship, a deep, resonant howl of artificial intelligence awakening to the invaders. The Imperium knew they were here, but it didn't matter. They had come to end this war. The Eternal Dominion pulsed like a living thing, its corridors shifting, twisting, more organic than mechanical. Cade's boots echoed against the metallic floor as his team pushed deeper into the ship's labyrinthine interior, their weapons raised. They were inside the nerve center of the Imperium zenith, the seat of its power, but it felt wrong. The walls throbbed, shifting as if sensing their presence. This ship was alive. A voice rumbled through the ship, vibrating in Cade's skull. Fascinating. You have come so far, and yet you have already lost. Supreme Archon Zalzir. Cade motioned, his team forward, pulse rifle locked on the corridor ahead. They advanced, clearing passageways as automated turrets emerged from the walls, firing beams of plasma-hot energy. Carter took cover behind a console, cursing. He's watching us. Roan fired a quick shot, taking out a sentry drone. Then let's make sure he sees this. They reached a towering door. Zalzir's chamber lay beyond. Cade touched the control panel. The door hissed open. Inside, waiting for them, stood the Supreme Archon of the Imperium Zenith, 10 feet tall, wrapped in living armor. His glowing cybernetic veins pulsed in unison with the ship's heartbeat. "You have come to kill a god," Zalzir said, his eyes burning like dying stars. "But gods do not die." Cade raised his rifle. "We'll see about that." Above Earth, the war was ending in fire. The once mighty Aegis fleet, humanity's last line of defense, was little more than a scattering of burning wreckage, its proud warships torn apart by Imperium dreadnoughts. The void was littered with debris, the frozen corpses of fallen pilots drifting like silent echoes of a battle nearly lost. The Imperium's final wave had begun. Hundreds of planet cracker warships aligned in precise formation, their weapons primed to turn Earth into a barren rock. The first wave of antimatter lances tore through the upper atmosphere, sending shockwaves rippling across the planet's surface. Inside Facility Theta, buried beneath Antarctica's ice, Dr. Anya Patel was running out of time. The quantum destabilizer stood at full charge, its unstable core pulsing like a dying star, the final weapon that could turn the tide. But there was one problem. It wasn't stable. If they fired at the wrong moment, it wouldn't just destroy the Imperium's fleet. It would rip open the very fabric of space-time, turning Earth into a gravitational anomaly. Juno Vale, Patel's second-in-command, shouted over the alarms. "We don't have enough stabilization. If we fire now, we might not survive." Patel's hands flew across the control panel, overriding safety protocols, forcing the machine to do what physics said was impossible. She looked up, her eyes filled with the weight of inevitability. If we don't fire, we die anyway. Above them, the first planet cracker warhead detached from an Imperium warship, its descent unstoppable. There was no more time. Patel exhaled, her fingers trembling over the final activation key. Then she slammed her fist down. The quantum destabilizer fired. A shockwave of pure reality distortion erupted outward. It was not light, not energy. Something beyond both, something that shouldn't exist. The first Imperium warships caught in the blast collapsed inward, their mass vanishing into pockets of nothingness. One second they were unstoppable juggernauts. The next, they simply ceased to be. The battlefield went silent. For a moment, it seemed like Earth was saved. Then Patel's console screamed in protest. Warning lights flashed red. The destabilizer's readings spiked violently. The rift was growing. Something was very, very wrong. Cade fired first. Zalzir didn't dodge. He shifted, his body rippling like a mirage, existing in multiple places at once. One moment he was directly in front of them. The next he was 10 feet to the right, his movements unnatural beyond time itself. Every shot missed. Then he struck back. A pulse of raw kinetic force slammed into Cade's chest, launching him off his feet like he'd been hit by a starship at full burn. He hit the far wall hard, ribs cracking under the impact. Carter opened fire. Roan charged forward, blade drawn, a warrior's last defiant stand. Zalzir was faster. He flowed through their attacks, twisting around Carter's plasma bursts, catching. Roan's blade mid-swing with inhuman precision, then his clawed hand closed around Roan's throat. The alien gasped, struggling, veins darkening as something sickly and wrong spread from Zalzir's touch. "Your kind knelt before me once," Zalzir mused, his voice cold and ancient. "You should have remained loyal." Roan choked, his eyes turning black, his very essence burning away under the Supreme Archon's grip. Cade forced himself up, breathing through the pain. They couldn't beat him in combat. Zalzir wasn't just a commander. He was the Imperium. Cade's gaze flickered past Zalzir, to the central control console behind him. His mind clicked into place. The Imperium's entire fleet, their war machine, their AI coordination, it was all centralized through this ship. Killing Zalzir wouldn't be enough. If they cut him down, another Archon would take his place. But if they severed his control, If they could overwrite his command of the Imperium, they wouldn't just win the battle, they'd collapse the Imperium itself. His voice came out raw and desperate. Forget killing him. We're taking over his network. Roan, still struggling, forced out a rasp. How? Cade's fingers flew across his gauntlet, transmitting an emergency override sequence into the Imperium's war servers. Carter, still firing, caught on instantly. You're going to overwrite him. Cade nodded, barely keeping his focus as his HUD flashed unauthorized access warnings. We're about to turn their entire fleet against itself. Zalzir's burning gaze snapped toward Cade. For the first time, there was something in his expression that wasn't arrogance. It was fear. A single command string was sent. A single line of code, disguised as an Imperium override protocol, embedded deep into the ship's AI core. The system didn't reject it. It couldn't. The source of the command wasn't an external attack. It came from within Zalzir's own ship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, across the battlefield, the Imperium's entire fleet convulsed. Thousands of warships, once moving, in perfect unison suddenly froze, their seamless coordination fracturing. Dreadnoughts drifted off course. War cruisers misfired at nothing, and planetary bombers halted mid-descent, confused by their own corrupted targeting systems. The Imperium's war machine had just been hacked. On the bridge of the Imperium's second-largest dreadnought, an admiral's voice shrieked across the command channel. What's happening? Who authorized this sequence? His crew frantically checked the systems, but there was no enemy to blame, because the commands came from their own high command. A moment later, their ship's main batteries rotated 180 degrees and fired into their own fleet. They weren't the only ones. Across the void, Imperium warships turned against each other. Formations collapsed as battleships engaged friendly forces. Their targeting algorithms scrambled. Fleets collided. Dreadnoughts rammed into one another, and the once unstoppable armada fractured before humanity's eyes. The Imperium's unshakable unity shattered, and it broke all at once. In the core chamber of the Eternal Dominion, Zalzir staggered, his towering form flickering, his biomechanical veins pulsing erratically, as if losing connection with reality itself. His face twisted into something no one had ever seen before. Fear. His hands trembled, his connection to the Imperium's war mind failing as the network he had ruled over for centuries collapsed under the weight of betrayal. His own forces were turning on each other. His empire was eating itself alive. What have you done? Zalzir's voice trembled, distorted, no longer the godlike entity that had commanded millennia of conquest. Cade stepped forward, pulse rifle raised. For the first time, Zalzir looked at a human and saw not an insect but the end of his empire. Cade's voice was cold, final. We just showed the galaxy you're not a god. Zalzir's eyes burned in fury, his body convulsing as the Imperium's failing network consumed him. His form collapsed inward, folding into itself, his existence erased by the very power he had once wielded. The supreme archon of the Imperium. Zenith was no more. The Eternal Dominion was dying. With Zalzir erased, the once mighty nerve center of the Imperium Zenith collapsed into chaotic disarray. The ship's AI core, once an omniscient war engine, flickered between conflicting commands, its self-repair systems overwhelmed by cascading failures. Aboard Erebus Station, sensors screamed, "Sir, the Eternal Dominion's core is destabilizing." Deep inside the crumbling flagship, Cade's comm crackled. "Commander, the ship's going critical. We have 2 minutes before this thing implodes." Cade turned, yanking Roan to his feet, the alien still gasping from Zalzir's previous attack. "Move. Now." Carter fired into the corridor ahead. Plasma LAOND. Rounds slicing through the last surviving Imperium guards, cutting them down as the team sprinted toward the extraction point. The hallways warped and crumbled, flickering lights casting erratic shadows as bulkheads buckled. Fire burst from ruptured conduits, filling the air with the stench of burning metal and ozone. Roan stumbled, but Cade caught him, dragging him forward. "We leave no one behind." Ahead, the docking bay was a nightmare. The ship's internal gravity was failing, sending debris floating unpredictably while airlocks violently decompressed, sucking bodies into the void. Their drop shuttle waited, its rear thrusters already primed for launch. A massive support beam collapsed, cutting off their path. Carter didn't hesitate. She leapt onto the debris, using the unstable wreckage as a bridge. "Jump, damn it!" she yelled. Cade and Roan followed, barely making it across before the wreckage gave way, spiraling into the abyss. They threw themselves into the shuttle, the pilot screaming into comms. "Hang on, we're blasting out of here!" The thrusters ignited, slamming them into their seats as the shuttle tore away from the imploding warship. As they cleared the blast zone, the Eternal Dominion collapsed inward, folding into itself, its hull twisting under gravitational stress, disappearing into a brilliant explosion of white-hot energy. In orbit, the Imperium fleet was in ruins. The once unstoppable war machine had been reduced to chaos, its ships leaderless, aimless, broken, and below, Earth still stood. Cade exhaled, staring at the burning sky. The war was over, and humanity had won. The sky above Earth was no longer blue. It was a charred wasteland of fire and ash, the upper atmosphere scarred by plasma bombardments, thick clouds of smoke and dust blotting out the sun. The sky wept embers instead of rain, a grim testament to what had been lost. The Imperium had retreated, but their mark on Earth was permanent. Entire cities were gone, not merely destroyed, but wiped from existence, as if they had never been. New. Avalon, Earth's once great capital, was nothing more than a smoldering graveyard. Where its grand spires once reached toward the heavens, there was now only jagged steel, their skeletal remains casting long, haunting shadows across the ruined streets. The air reeked of death, ash, burning metal, and the lingering scent of obliteration filled every breath, and beneath it all lay the bodies, 1 billion dead. Men, women, children. Entire bloodlines erased in a matter of days. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like anything at all. Cade stood in the heart of the devastation, his boots crunching over shattered glass and blackened debris. The weight of survival settled on his shoulders like a leaden shroud, heavy, suffocating, inescapable. This is what I fought for. But as he looked out at the endless devastation, at the ruins of a world that would never truly recover, he felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just a hollow, aching emptiness. A voice crackled over his comms. "Sir, the Imperium fleet is gone. We're alone in the system. Alone." The word sank into him like a blade. Cade exhaled, his breath slow and ragged, the exhaustion of the past weeks, months, years finally catching up to him. His eyes drifted to the horizon, where New Avalon had once stood proud and untouchable. Now there was only ruin. There was no celebration, no cheering crowds, only the cold realization that this was just the beginning. Humanity had survived, but the war was far from over. Tavarik stood motionless atop the ruins of New Avalon's grand spire, staring out at the shattered remnants of a civilization that had refused to kneel. The sun was rising, its dim orange glow cutting through the smoky sky, casting long, fractured rays across the broken city. The air still smelled of fire and death, the bitter aftertaste of war clinging to the ruins like an unwanted ghost. His people had done this. The Imperium, the empire he had once served without question, without doubt. And yet humanity had not broken. They had fought, suffered, bled, and won. But at what cost? Tavarik turned to Cade, his scaled features unreadable, his slit pupil eyes reflecting the devastation around them. "Do you believe my kind can be saved?" Cade's jaw tightened. He had seen what the Imperium was, how its blind obedience to conquest had nearly wiped out an entire species. He had seen the horrors unleashed upon Earth, the destruction of entire cities, entire generations lost. And yet, here stood Tavarik, an Imperium defector, a warrior who had fought for a people that were not his own. The silence stretched between them, heavy, filled with the weight of too many unspoken truths. After a long moment, Cade sighed. I don't know. Tavarik nodded slowly, his expression grim, resigned. Neither do I. A few blocks away, Mia Carter stood alone before the remains of her childhood home, or what little was left of it. The leader of the resistance, the woman who had fought in the streets, who had bled for every inch of Earth's survival, now stood among the very ashes of the world she had saved. There was no glory in this victory, no celebration. She had given everything to ensure Earth's survival. And yet the world she had fought for no longer existed. Her fingers clenched into fists. Her knuckles white. We should have burned them all, she muttered, her voice low, cold, bitter. Cade turned toward her, hearing the anger beneath her words, the hatred, and for the first time, a thought cut through him like a blade. A thought he could not ignore. Didn't winning change them? Had survival cost them their humanity? Had they just become the very thing they swore to destroy? The transmission came 3 days after the war ended. A message from the Tral Republic and the Vexari Freeholds, two of the galaxy's most influential neutral factions, species that had once refused to stand with humanity when the Imperium first invaded. Now they wanted an alliance. Humanity had done the impossible. They had survived a war that should have been unwinnable, against an empire that had never been defeated, and the galaxy had taken notice. The diplomatic envoy from the Tral Republic, a tall avian-like being with sapphire-colored feathers and piercing silver eyes, stood before Cade, her delicate wings folded tightly against her back. She regarded him not with pity, as she might have before the war, but with something that bordered on respect. She bowed deeply, a gesture of acknowledgement between equals. We once believed you would crumble beneath the Imperium's might, she said, her voice smooth and practiced. We were wrong. Earth endures, and we would rather stand beside you than against you. Cade said nothing at first. He had spent so long fighting for survival, so long watching his people die that the thought of diplomacy, of politics, felt foreign to him now. Finally, he gave a tired nod. We'll talk. The war with the Imperium had changed humanity. They had not just earned their place in the galactic order, they had forced the galaxy to recognize them. The Tral Republic and the Vexari Freeholds were only the first. Others would follow. Some would come as allies, others as rivals, seeking to test the strength of the species that had just killed a god. But before Cade could even consider what came next, another transmission arrived. A distress signal. From deep space. 1 of Earth's scout vessels had intercepted it, a fragmented transmission barely readable sent on an Imperium frequency. Survivors. The Imperium wasn't dead. Somewhere, out in the void, the remnants of their fleet were regrouping, and they were coming back. Cade clenched his jaw, his fingers curling into tight fists. Humanity had won this war, but another war was already waiting in the dark. And this time, the entire galaxy was watching. Cade stood on the crumbling remains of what had once been New Avalon's grandest plaza. The wind howled through the shattered steel spires, carrying with it the scent of ash, fire, and something colder, emptiness. World won, but at what cost? The once great city, the beating heart of humanity, was now a graveyard of metal and dust. The streets, once bustling with life, were silent, lifeless, a monument to the war that had ravaged everything it touched. He closed his eyes, listening. There were no celebrations, no cheering crowds, no victory marches, just the wind. The weight of what had been lost sat heavy on his chest. And yet, he knew, this was just the beginning. The galaxy had seen Earth endure, and now it would never look at humanity the same way again. They had proven they were strong enough to survive the Imperium zenith, which meant they were now a threat. Enemies would come. New wars would be fought. Cade turned his gaze to the stars, to the abyss beyond Earth's ruined skies. Somewhere out there, the Imperium survivors were regrouping. Somewhere out there, someone was already planning humanity's next war. His grip tightened around his rifle. Let them come, because humanity had learned one thing above all else. They would never kneel. The transmission came just before midnight. A signal, distant but intentional, intercepted by one of Earth's deep space relays. The message was short and chilling. Voice in flawless standard galactic, smooth, composed, almost amused. Earth, you have our attention now. Let's see if you survive what comes next. Then silence. The tracking AI tried to trace the origin. It failed. Whoever had sent the message had masked their location completely. Cade stood in the command center of Erebus Station, the flickering blue light of the transmission still hanging in the air before him. His officers shifted uncomfortably. Even the most battle-hardened veterans looked uneasy. This wasn't just an idle threat. This was a promise. Rowan Taverick leaned forward, studying the message with narrowed, calculating eyes. "That's not the Imperium," he muttered. Cade exhaled. "No, it's someone else. A new enemy. A force that had been watching them, waiting. And now? Now, Earth was no longer a backwater species to be ignored. They had entered the galactic stage, and the galaxy was about to test them. Cade turned off the Yao message, his expression unreadable. The war hadn't ended. It had just begun.